Dajaha, hi guys, it's Shanae and welcome back to my channel. And unfortunately, my microphone is once again not working, and I don't know if it's a laptop problem or a microphone problem, because it just sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, we're once again on the softer side. I've moved my laptop as close as I can to try and eliminate as much of the distance between my voice and where the speaker is picking up, but this is the best I can do. I'm so sorry. Like, I debated not doing the live because of it, but honestly, I so badly just want to read, and that would mean potentially not being able to finish silent reading before I go on holiday, which I really want to try and do. So, hi. So, yeah, I hope the audio is okay-ish. I'll try and be as projected as possible and try not to bump into things, because it also, like, because it's the laptop sound system, it picks up if I like tap things. And I do unfortunately have long nails at the moment, and I'm not into ASMR. I don't know if my audience is, but I'm gonna try and not cause ear aneurysms, okay? So, anyway, that was not a very smooth start to things, and we are running a little bit late already, so I think I'm just quickly gonna introduce myself for anyone who maybe is new here, and then we're just gonna jump into it. So, hi, I'm Janae. I read Danmei. We take a 10-minute break on the hour, and we read for between 2 to 3 hours, depending on whether my voice holds up and whether I'm 2 seconds away from falling asleep, because I did not get a lot of sleep last night. So we're gonna go for 2 hours, and I will see how I feel by the end of that, and then decide whether we're gonna try for 3 instead. So yeah, that is more or less it. I have tea here with me. My voice is already sounding a little bit not good. So I hope that doesn't bode badly for the rest of the live stream. But yeah, let me just quickly pop out the chat, and then I think it might also be because I'm talking much louder than I'm used to. I feel a little bit like I'm screaming. Let me grab that. Okay. So we were on page 211 of volume 4, chapter 110, Verhovensky 20. Feidu paused rather ambiguously. Wei? Shashanan choked with sobs, nodded. Perhaps it was a young child's mistake. She thought that in the instant when Feidu looked up, a cold light flashed through his eyes. She therefore swallowed back the reminder that covering a surveillance camera is against regulation. Anyway, there was more than one surveillance camera in the room. Covering one didn't impact anything. Feidu rolled his sleeves up slightly and sat down. What kind of person is this Wei Wenqian? In a somewhat murky voice, Xia Shaonan quietly said, "He's our class monitor." Nang Chao had been acting as note-taker. Hearing this, the tip of her pen suddenly paused. "How many class monitors does your class have?" "One. Just him." This Wei Wenqian had come to the city bureau. The day of Feng Bin's murder, when the city bureau had taken over and sent people to seek out the runaway students, they'd called in Feng Bin's homeroom teacher, Gan Ni, for questioning. There had been an unusually eye-catching teenage boy by her side who'd introduced himself as the class monitor. When something happened to the student, a public security bureau would call in the teacher and school administrators, but they wouldn't call in an underage student without notifying his parents. In other words, Wei Wenqian had come himself. So essentially, like, coming to witness the scene of the crime for himself, in a sense, or the fallout. So, if this business really did have to do with him, when he'd seen the bustling police bureau, the grief stricken parents, the group of shivering students, what had he felt? Had he been afraid? Anxious? Worried that the schoolyard bullying would come out and he would be implicated? No. Lang Chao thought back carefully. She remembered that the boy's bearing had been very easy. The ease of looking on from the sidelines as something that had nothing to do with him happened. He'd been poised and polite, smiling slightly whenever he saw anyone. If he'd been disturbed, they definitely would have noticed. It seemed more like he'd come to inspect the outcome of his plans. No wonder the 4 students who'd been brought back hadn't dared to say a word in a public security bureau. A chill went up Lang Chao's back. I mean, honestly, in that situation, the fact that he seemed so unattached should have been a red flag, considering that it is so unusual to be so unaffected by a fellow classmate's death. I mean, I experienced 2 deaths of people who were in my school throughout my time in high school, and even though I didn't know them that well, both affected me. So, like, that should have been a red flag all its own. Next to her, in a hypnotically soft voice, Feidu said to Xia Xiaonan, "Could you tell me concretely what happened?" Xia Xiaonan had her head down, her tears falling one after another, quickly soaking the business card Feidu had given her. She was clutching it tightly, as if the little piece of paper was her last hope. At the beginning of December, I was feeling unwell one day, so I asked to take off and didn't go to PE. I was reading alone in a classroom. Suddenly Feng Bin came back to the class and told me that I was this year's dear. Feiru finished for her. I heard you only transferred to Yufan for senior middle. It seems you already know what their so-called dear is, right? Xia Shanan's shoulders drew in. I saw them messing with Wang Xiao. Feidu very gently took on a posture of listening attentively. The girls in Wang Xiao's dorm and the ones from the dorm next door, one day, for some reason, they threw her bedding out the window and they pushed her, hit her, called her a lot of ugly sounding words. I was just passing by the dormitory building then, and the quilt falling down startled me. I didn't know what was going on. A girl next to me told me that Wang Xiao was the dear, that each year everyone chose the most loathsome person. She was dirty and cheap, and anyone who lived in the same dorm as her was unfortunate. Then someone came from the boys' dormitory across the way. He laughed and said, "This is my slave. How come you're hitting her again?" And he gave the girls hitting her a few hundred yuan. Wang Chao recalled how she had to save up for a whole semester to go to one concert during her middle school days and felt that she was listening to a fantasy story. A few hundred? It must have been 500. Shashanan thought she was asking for a definite amount and answered accordingly. Because I remember that the girl who took the money counted it and said, "Why is it 500 now? 100 less. Wang Xiao's price goes down every day." That sort of thing. Wang Xiao didn't make a sound. She picked up her fallen stuff on her own. The girls wouldn't let her go in the dormitory building, saying that they'd sold her and telling her to go with the buyer. Then the boy waved a hand at her and she went into the boys' dormitory. All of these people need to have their heads examined. Like, what the hell? What? Hearing this, Ling Chao nearly jumped to her feet. For a good while, she was stupefied, stammering somewhat. She said, That's appalling. Aren't there teachers in your dormitories? Didn't they do something? There are teachers, Xia Shannan said quietly, but they don't do anything about it. They don't dare to do anything. Then they need to be charged with aiding and abetting child sexual trafficking or something to that effect, because like what the hell is this? What the hell is this? I feel like there should be a charge for whatever nonsense this is. Feidu poured 2 glasses of water and put one each in front of Ling Chao and Xia Shannan. Then he said to Xia Shannan, "So you were very afraid of receiving the same treatment." Xia Shannan almost inaudibly squeezed words out of her throat. I was standing there that day, watching her pick up her things. She'd pick them up but couldn't hold them. She'd pick up one and drop another. I really wanted to help her, but probably only someone who'd fallen on the ground and had no one to help them up would regret that they hadn't helped another from the first. Feidu smiled faintly, not taking up her words. He only asked, "Fan Bin told you that he had a way, right? Did he tell you in detail what he was planning to do after running away from school?" Xia Shannan said, "He said he had a friend outside of the school who had a lot of connections. He'd already contacted this person and was going to reveal this business. He'd had enough of the school." Feidu said, "Who was this friend?" "I don't know his real name, only his pen name or maybe his online handle. I think it was Go Ask Chateau. I don't know how to pronounce that. He promised us he'd make all the hideous things at school public." I forgot about this. How did I forget about this? Feidu silently looked towards a corner. There was another unobtrusive surveillance camera in the corner. He seemed to be exchanging a look with the person watching. "Have you seen this friend? I love how they're exchanging looks even when they're not face to face, like the magic of soulmates." And I do believe they are. "Have you seen this friend?" Xia Shannan shook her head numbly. "No, Feng Bin said this person was out of town for a little while, though he'd arranged to come back for Christmas. We'd stay at the hotel and wait for him for a few days, but we didn't have time. Since you'd already determined to leave with Feng Bin, why did you repent later?" "Because the day before we were going to leave, Wei Wenquan came to see me. He said he knew everything, including how and when we were planning to leave, where we were going, everyone who was going. He told me to think carefully, because no one would care about these trifles going on at school, and most of you students would issue apologies, and afterwards it would get even worse." It's funny how he's telling her that no one would care, but the only reason he's telling her that is because he knows that if it got out, people would care and he would lose control. Like, if no one cared, why would he be worried? And as for the media, the school, they all have family connections. Outside society is the same as school, divided by social positions, with people who can have the final say. He had means of finding out our plans ahead of time, and he also had means of making it so we couldn't attend school again. If I didn't believe him, I was welcome to try." Feidu sighed because he knew that these words really weren't purely a threat. They were a threat of the truth as it was. "So you surrendered." I Wei Wen-chen told me that actually it had been Liang Yujing's idea to choose me to be the deer, because I stole her thunder on the exams and made her lose face in front of her parents. Her mother is one of the school trustees. Even if she killed someone at school, it could be settled. The thing is, that is a very bold claim, and it's likely false. But I don't doubt that these kids are arrogant enough to actually think they could get away with it. And whether or not it's settled after you're dead, it doesn't bring you back to life. So it's not a risk that you want to take, obviously. Oh, goodness. Counting on the victim to be too scared to think it through. Plus, you can always count on corruption to win over justice most of the time, so it's usually not an empty threat. Exactly. No one dared to offend her, unless he personally went to speak to Liang Yujing. What did he want you to do? He gave me a phone with tracking and eavesdropping functions, and he promised me that after this one thing was over, I'd be able to calmly finish a senior, middle, and graduate. No one would bother me. What's his definition of calmly finish? Because being an accomplice to a murder, I don't think allows for calm anything in the aftermath. Did you know what he wanted to do then? I didn't know. Xia Shannan shook her head desperately. I really didn't know. When we went to the drum tower and suddenly ran into that person, I was scared out of my wits. When Feng Bin pushed me and told me to run, I didn't even realize what was going on. It was so dark. I thought someone had just hit him from behind. I didn't know that person. Didn't know that person was holding a knife. Didn't know that when Feng Bin, voice full of terror, told her to run, his back had been cut up. Because it had been too dark, the sudden surprise attack had left her with no time to react. He must only have been hit from behind. Wei Wen-chen must have found a group of delinquents to teach Feng Bin a lesson. She'd been comforting herself like this, and her senses had had to obligingly collaborate to trick her and themselves. So up to the last, you didn't throw the phone away? Lang Chao at last couldn't resist saying this. All the blood drained out of Xia Shanan's face. No wonder the killer had been in no hurry and known exactly what to do. Feidu said, in the end, you accidentally ran into a dead-end alley. Child, relax a bit, alright? The more detailed the information you give us, the better we'll be able to catch the person who killed Feng Bin. Xia Shannan curled up into a ball, her eyes looking in panic at Feidu like a fawn's. And the irony, considering what she was supposed to be, according to the frickin' game, Feidu tried softening his voice and slowly leading her on. The circumstances were very urgent then. Feng Bin saw that there was a dead end ahead, but it was already too late to turn back. So he had you hide in the garbage bin. It was very late in the day. The person had... the person-high garbage bin was full of a pungent, reeking, sour smell. There was a lid over your head. It was black all around. You couldn't see anything. You could only hear the sounds coming from outside. What did you hear? Cries for help. Xia Shannan whispered after a long silence. At first he cried for help, and no one answered. Then he babbled, trying to talk to the killer, asking who he was, promising to give him all his money. The killer didn't say anything. Not long after, I heard frantic steps, some noise, and a scream. Then there wasn't any sound. Then after a while I heard a laugh, and also the The sound of heavy objects falling on the ground one after another. Okay. Oh, great. Thank you, priest, for having to spell that out to us. It hadn't been heavy objects falling. It had been the thudding of Fungbin's limbs hitting the ground as Lu Gusheng chopped them off. Thanks. Thanks for that one. Then that person came towards me. He knew where I was hiding. I was terrified. He was singing a song. Shashanan remembered a couple of lines. Little rabbit, be good, open up as you should. Gooseflesh instantly rose in Lang Chao's arms. On. Then he pulled me out of the garbage bin. I was scared to death. I even forgot to breathe. And he reached out towards me, took my backpack, found my phone and my wallet. I thought it was dead meat, but he only smiled at me, waved my phone around, and left without saying anything. I finally saw Fungbin. Shashanan seemed to have returned to a nightmare. Her eyes lost focus, and she gasped for breath. Fedu leaned forward and took her hand. The trace of warmth on his palm scalded the girl's frozen hand, instantly pulling her back into the present. Staring, she hung onto Fedu's hand as if it were a lifeline. I'm sorry. I was scared. While a human lifetime might contain hundreds of thousands of regrets of all kinds, in the main, most of them came down to these words. I'm sorry. I was scared. Lo Wenjul watched this dialogue from the observation room, turned away, his face grave. He called Taran. Have you contacted the students involved in the case and their parents? What did they say? It was very noisy where Taran was. It's a bit of a mess. The school is giving me the runaround. In the last 5 minutes, I've gotten calls from 7 or 8 lawyers. These children of wealthy families. Bring them all back, including the teachers who watch the dormitories and the school's management, Lo Wenjul said coldly. Yufan middle school students are under suspicion of abuse group sexual assault. Yeah. What? At first Taran was shocked. After a pause, he said at once, I'm on it. Lo Wenjul hung up the phone and stood at the door of the observation room, letting out a long breath. Then he remembered something and opened the audiobook software he'd recently downloaded. This week, the topic submitted by the reciter was Demons Paced Through the Empty Night. Demons Paced Through the Empty Night. Demons by Dostoevsky. Shatov was a character in the book who'd been murdered for being a whistleblower, delicately coinciding with Fungbin's experience. And the person who'd contacted Fungbin and promised to expose the filthy events at Yufeng Middle School, why would he so coincidentally be called Go Ask Shatov? Had a certain person, or a certain power, knowing beforehand about Fungbin's decision to take Shashanan away, predicted this bloody incident? Had they been plotters or promoters? Okay, I'm gonna put my hand up just because I'm not sure if this would count as a spoiler, but it feels a bit spoilery. So you can listen again when I put my hand down if you want to avoid spoilers, but it's just funny to me how the janitor can at once see himself as a hero and still sit by while this happens, when there was at least enough suspicion that he could have tipped the bureau off in some way had that been his intention. Why had they declared themselves so brazenly this time? Lo Wen-jo stood in the long and narrow corridor and smoked 2 cigarettes in a row. He looked up at the murky sky outside the window. It was overcast and getting ready to snow. He remembered the mysterious patrolman he and Fei-du had bumped into that day at the drum tower, feeling that he'd put his hand into still waters and felt the surging undercurrent beneath. The city bureau's powerful interventions was like a sharp lever, prying open corners, sheltering evil. Ooh! Both the undercurrent beneath and this sentence here were beautiful. That afternoon, all classes at Yufan Middle School were suspended. The police simply commandeered the school's offices and interviewed all the students separately and took all the implicated teachers and school staff back to the city bureau. The students who had been kept under high pressure and were once more seeing the light of day at last couldn't contain themselves. They revealed the true state of affairs, and the situation became irretrievable, which is very satisfying. That evening, pudgy little Zhang Yifan, like the superhero and the raised fist on his clothing, was the first to stand up and use his real name, writing a long and clumsy written article and posting it online. After a brief silence, the silent lambs at last stopped their day's steps and let out weak cries that gradually gathered into a roar. There we go. The shocked parents swarmed around, nearly coming to blows at the city bureau's gates. The chaotic work of investigating and gathering evidence continued until 10 o'clock at night before stopping out of consideration for the health and mental well-being of the miners. The unfortunate Tyran's Chrome's mouth had uttered a prediction. They would indeed have to work overtime this weekend. On the way home, Fei-du hardly said a word. Lo Wen-jo turned his head to look at him and saw him sitting in the passenger's seat, actually sleeping while maintaining his upright posture. Lo Wen-jo turned the heating up as high as it would go and drove all the way home as evenly as he could. Only when they were entering the estate did he take Fei-du's hand and shake it gently. Oh. Wake up. Time to get out of the car. Don't get chilled. Fei-du's back had gone somewhat stiff from sitting. He agreed reluctantly without entirely waking up. He stared blankly up ahead until Lo Wen-jo pulled into his parking spot and stopped the car. What are you looking at? Lo Wen-jo touched his head, then felt his warm neck and tightened his scarf. We're nearly home. Why? Fei-du's voice was somewhat hoarse. He pointed. Why are the lights on in your house? Oh, I'm so excited for this. Oh, okay. Let's see if we can get through another chapter before the end of the hour. Chapter 111, Verhovensky 21. The lights in Lo Wen-jo's house were not only on, they were on rather aggressively, pouring out of the living room onto the balcony. Lo Wen-jo stared, got out of the car, and looked around, and not far away found a very familiar car. Strange. Today isn't Friday. Today is Friday, Fei-du said helplessly. Lo Wen-jo. ... So-called Friday was like a beauty set off by family background and splendid attire. Remove the meaning of its name, and the thing itself was worthless. For someone who had to work on festivals and holidays and had gotten the days of the week confused, it would instead become a source of increasing grief and indignation. Oh my word, he's actually such a drama queen, let's be real. Lo Wen-jo sighed. As he urged Fei-du to hurry up and not dawdle outside, he casually said, "It's fine. It's because there aren't many parking spaces. The neighbors leave to spend the weekends in the countryside on Friday and Saturday evenings so we can get by using one of their spots for a while. My parents sometimes come over on Friday evenings to bring me some stuff, though they may not have time to come more than once every few months. Then they come to sit for a while and leave. Oh my word. Feidu's steps suddenly stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The corridor's sound operator lights hadn't been working very smoothly lately. You had to stamp hard to wake them. Now they were still. Feidu was standing half inside and half outside, the glow of the street lights surrounding his shoulders in a pale halo. What would his parents think? Coming over and suddenly seeing a strange man living here? I mean, you've met the mom. You're not a complete stranger. She brought you food. Feidu hesitated, not knowing how he should introduce himself. A colleague? A friend? A roommate? Or, in a flash, Feidu remembered seeing Mu Xiaoqing at the hospital that day. What had her last meaningful words meant? Had Luo Wenzhou officially come out of the closet to his parents, or had that lady just been relying on a mother's instinct and sounding him out? This was Luo Wenzhou's private business. Feidu had never asked about it, and he had nothing to judge from. Exchanges between physical bodies were, after all, only a brief expression of desire. Oh yes, I'm sure if you tell that to Luo Wenzhou, he will not hit you over the head and be completely offended that you don't think you guys are dating. Feidu thought that the relationship between him and Luo Wenzhou was a tangle of unclear ambiguity. It became more confused with each step. He was accustomed to carefully analyzing and arranging everything about himself. He only now realized with the start that in this, he didn't even have a sense of boundaries or any plans. He just let things develop as they would. It was as though he was going downstream in a little boat, not caring about the direction, not caring about the hidden reefs. If he encountered a whirlpool and was swallowed by it, he wasn't planning on struggling. No, I know Feidu doesn't think they're dating, but I think Luo Wenzhou is going to be offended because he thinks they are dating. That's where I think he's at. But that was a tragic description. Luo Wenzhou looked back, looking right into his eyes. What's wrong? Luo Wenzhou's expression was so matter-of-fact that it seemed he hadn't noticed at all that there was anything inappropriate in the scene. Feidu paused, then tactfully tried, "With your parents here, won't I be a little in the way?" The tips of Luo Wenzhou's eyebrows moved slightly. Perhaps it was because it was too dark all around and Feidu couldn't see his subtle expression clearly, or perhaps it was because Luo Wenzhou was accustomed to not showing his emotions on his face, and the more genuine feelings he had, the more unmoved he looked. At any rate, Feidu actually couldn't tell for a time what his meaning was. Then, as though nothing was the matter, Luo Wenzhou said, "It's fine. They know you're here. The two of them came to look at you when you were in the hospital, though you weren't entirely conscious then, and my mom came to bring you food afterwards. You must remember." Feidu gave a brief affirmative and relaxed, thinking he'd understood Luo Wenzhou's implication. It seemed that to Luo Wenzhou's parents, he could be a friend who had saved their son's life. Oh no. Oh. Friendliness and uncared for, with no one to mind him, and since wait, hold on. I stopped that sentence in the middle of it, my bad, okay? It seemed that to Lowenjo's parents he could be a friend who had saved their son's life. Friendliness and uncared for, with no friendless and uncared for. Why do I keep reading friendliness? Friendless and uncared for, with no one to mind him. And since they were both single young men, he was staying here as a rent-reducing roommate until his wounds were completely healed. Probably the couple had heard that he'd gotten out of the hospital and come over especially to have a look at him out of gratitude and politeness. Oh no. Oh. Having determined his own position, Feiru's faltering state of mind immediately settled, and he became easy again, once more becoming the present Fei who could talk to anyone in their own language. He didn't see the hand hanging at Lowenjo's side tighten. In the previous days, when the door had opened, it had been Loi Guo coming out to welcome them. Now, circumstances had changed, and Mu Xiaoqing herself came out. As soon as she saw Lowenjo, she quickly began to grumble. Why so late? I was just about to call you. Before Feidu could speak, Mu Xiaoqing was very familiarly pulling him inside, comfortably rebuking him. It's freezing cold outside, and you're going out dressed like that without anyone to mind you? Hurry in and get warm. Have you two eaten? Why does she sound exactly like Lowenjo? Like, I immediately see where Lowenjo got his personality from. We ate. Lowenjo looked around. My goodness, have you two come to aid the poor or to visit a prisoner in jail? There's no place to stand. What's this all about? His entrance hall was nearly stacked full of all kinds of big and small boxes. There wasn't even anywhere to change shoes. Lowenjo looked through them. He found there were mushrooms, prepared foods, tea leaves, fruits, snacks, and a pile of wantonly extravagant cans of cat food. Just when I think I can't adore his family anymore, they just do things like also bring food to Lo Yiguo, and I mean, yes, I just appreciate that so much. His oh wait, we already read that. In all honesty, Lo Yiguo weighed nearly 15 jin, sorry, not yin, jin. Why is there so much milk? I don't drink the stuff. Oh, and there's a set of cat toys. Wonderful. You picked your son up off the ground, but the cat is your own flesh and blood. You didn't buy the milk for you. Don't flatter yourself. Mu Xiaoqing said. What could there be at your dining hall that's good to eat? It's all oily and salty. It's fine if a crude and robust specimen like you eats slop 2 meals a day, but how could you wrong an injured person by making him eat it all along with you? Oh my goodness, her own son is a second-rate citizen, and then she treats Feidu like a darling. Lowenjo rolled his eyes towards Feidu, as if he would let himself be wronged. He not only ordered takeout for himself, he also had to drag the whole criminal investigation team into corruption along with him. It was rather vicious, but in the end, after restraining himself for a moment, he snorted and silently swallowed down his singular injustice throughout the ages, angrily shouldering the stack of things in the entrance hall and putting them away without complaint. From the moment the two of them had walked through the door, the mother and son had been going seamlessly back and forth like a comic crosstalk. And outside... Sorry, why am I struggling with words so much right now? An outsider couldn't get a word in at all. Only when Lowenjo left carrying the stuff did Feidu have an opportunity to calmly stick out his hand and say to Mu Xiaoqing, if I had known earlier that you were going to come over, I would have gone ahead to pick you up. After all, I'm only learning on the job. I can't help out at all at the city bureau. So, you've been doing fantastic interrogations. What are you on about? Wu Shaoqing loved listening to his mouthful of entirely unreserved, graceful talk. Because she felt that this young man was cut from the same cloth as her son, she had no sense of guilt that the pig she'd raised had ruined a cabbage and happily took him into the living room. I mean, that's certainly a view of things, I guess. Feidu immediately saw Lord Cheng sitting on the living room couch. Unlike Mu Shaoqing, you could see that this gentleman's blood relationship to Luo Wenzhou from his features. There was grey at Lord Cheng's temples. Unlike ordinary middle-aged men, he hadn't put on weight and grown a belly. His back was straight and there was a sober crease between his brows. He had an unfathomable sense of presence just sitting there on the couch, the sort of character that would be given the seat at the head of the table as soon as he walked into the private room at a restaurant. Only the atmosphere was somewhat spoiled by the fact that he was holding a cat in his arms. You know, that says everything about a person. It's like he seems so imposing and everything like that, and then he's like prioritizing a cat's comfort above his air of intimidation. And that just tells me everything I need to know about this man. Lord Cheng and Feidu exchanged a look. In a very short space of time, these two sophisticates from two different generations examined each other. Feidu overlooked the fact that the venerable fellow was playing a paw-catching game with the cats and greeted him very suitably. "Hello, uncle. Sorry to disturb you." Lord Cheng nodded. Then, in an unprecedented event, this retired emperor, who would matter-of-factly make his own lamed son give up his seat for him, stood up and quite amiably said to Feidu, "You're looking better. Come and sit down, quickly." I'm not understanding that sentence. Quite lamed. What the hell's lamed? Okay. Sorry, my English is failing me on that. And one of my biggest gripes with the show is here, why do the adaptations have such an issue with how fathers and relationships? First Guardian. No, don't, like, considering Guardian and Word of Honor and some other priest adaptations, even though the relationship between Luo Wenzhou or Luo Wei Zhao and his father was not as close, I still felt warmth from his dad, and it definitely still read as like a good dynamic to me, much different to me than any of the other priest relationships. Oh, so it's a different word for injured. I'm so used to just hearing the word lame in the sense of like something isn't exciting. Yeah, that's the best antonym that I could think of. Anyway, sorry, totally sidetracked myself there. Luo Yiguo yelled, rolling in the retired emperor's arms, aggressively climbing up onto his shoulder and licking its paws in this lofty position. "We've wanted to come see you for a long time, but that blockhead Luo Wenzhou kept saying we disturb your rest," Wu Shaoqing said very warmly. "Are you comfortable living here? If you need anything, just order him around. It won't kill him." Well, if that isn't a stamp of approval, I don't know what is. Feidu choked because he faintly felt that Mu Xiaoqing's tone was too intimate. Then he very cautiously said, Xishong takes pretty good care of me. Hearing this form of address, Mu Xiaoqing didn't say anything, but the corners of her eyes were full of a meaningful smile. When Lo Wenjuo had finished ungrudgingly clearing the entrance hall and somewhat worriedly stuck in his head to have a look, he found that their high-maintenance Master Fei and even more high-maintenance elderly gentleman were already chatting. Feidu had pulled out a youthful talent face. He was very well acquainted with dealing with this sort of middle-aged man. He'd entirely restrained his air of an idle son of the wealthy, leaving not a shred behind. He and the old man each occupied one corner of the couch, looking just like an investing businessman and a government representative preparing to collaborate on developing the city centre. Feidu had said something that was making Luo Cheng nod repeatedly. There was a hefty cat sitting on his head, and his brow was for once smoothed out, and he was earnestly remarking, That's a very good idea of yours. I'll flesh it out carefully when I leave and write a detailed report and send it to... Oh my goodness. Oh, it's such a sweet... The visual image, I kind of want someone to illustrate it because it just sounds amazing. Mu Xiaoqing hurriedly gave a dry cough and stuck a tangerine segment in her mouth, interrupting her old man's inopportune babble. It really was late. Hearing that tomorrow would be another day of catastrophic overtime at the city bureau, Lord Cheng and Mu Xiaoqing didn't stay long. They sat for a while, then stood up and got ready to leave. Feidu's etiquette was complete. Of course he wanted to see them out. He was pushed back by Mu Xiaoqing. Stay inside, Mu Xiaoqing said. Then she turned to Luo Wenjuo and ordered, You're a few years older than he is. You should take some more responsibility and restrain your spoiled temper at home. Do you hear me? This speech was so domestic as to make it suspect. Luo Wenjuo agreed indolently, but Feidu froze. Then Luo Cheng spoke, saying to Feidu, I hear your parents are both not around. If you encounter anything in the future that you really can't deal with, you can come to us. I'm living for this. It makes so much sense because of where the relationship is at, that this is the vibe that is needed in this moment, because it's not that they can't have a cold relationship with Feidu, but because of his past, a warm relationship with in-laws is a much preferred approach. So I'm so happy to see this, but I also get why they didn't really want to do it in the same way in the show, because that's not where the dynamic was at. It's very interesting how it shifted and yet still somewhat stayed the same. I'm pretty impressed by how they managed to do that. Feidu was surprised and bewildered. Meeting those eyes that resembled Luo Wenjuo's, he saw that Luo Cheng was actually smiling faintly at him, the expression on his imposing face almost kindly. Mu Xiaoqing waved at him and stuck her hand into Luo Cheng's pocket to keep warm. Beaming, she said, Our son has been heartless since he was little. It's been years since I saw him cry. Not waiting for her to finish, Luo Wenjuo yelled and cried out, See you, then closed the door, shutting out the rest of Mu Xiaoqing's words. With Mu Xiaoqing and Lord Cheng gone, the tumultuous living room at once quieted down. Luo Wenjuo knew that the old things hadn't been able to contain themselves and had run over to see Feidu. At first it had been alright, but in the end they'd sounded like they'd been enjoying a daughter-in-law. Fedu had a monster revealing mirror in his heart. He could see clearly through a conspiracy with only the slightest clue, never mind such an obvious demonstration. Lord Joe hadn't let them come all this time because he'd been afraid they would rashly pierce through the window paper, but now that it had come to this, in spite of himself, he was rather unexpectedly awaiting Fedu's reaction. Never mind whether it was a good reaction or a bad reaction, at least it would resolve the anxiety of hesitating in place. So I'm kind of wondering regarding the window paper comments, is that in reference to like in the old days when the windows were made of paper, making holes so you could peek in? I'm assuming. In contradictory fashion, he didn't dare to look at Fedu's expression. He only seemingly indifferently complained. They came without even calling ahead. They really know how to make trouble. I'll go heat up some milk. Fedu's gaze, which seemed to have physical presence, bored heavily into his back, watching him tear open a box of milk, pour a bit into a saucer for Igor, and then pour the rest into a cup. Mix in a spoonful of honey and stick it in the microwave. Lowen Joe knew that Fedu was watching him, but he couldn't determine the meaning of that gaze. His tongue moved. He thought over and over of bringing the subject up, breaking the awkward silence. But searching his gut and belly, he still couldn't think of what he wanted to say. A thin layer of sweat broke out on his back. In the whole kitchen, the only sound remaining in the silence was the wiring of the microwave. Then the microwave beeped. Owen Joe pulled himself together and reached out to open the door. Suddenly a hand reached over from behind him, catching his wrist. Owen Joe gave a start. He had been lost in thought just now and hadn't noticed Fedu approaching. "Why didn't you tell your parents?" Fedu asked, teasingly, carefully stroking his wrist. "I think there's been a big misunderstanding." Lowenjo's throat moved slightly. Fedu laughed quietly, pecking at the most sensitive place at the base of his ear, his other hand untucking Lowenjo's shirt. "I just got a scare. Shouldn't you make it up to me, Shishong? My technique really is very good. Just try it. I guarantee." Lowenjo held down his groping paw. Fedu was planning to cover this awkwardness up. Lowenjo was perfectly well aware of the situation and knew what was tactful. Of course he understood. If he only went along with this, he could enjoy a bit of unburdened sex before the miserable weekend of overtime. Then everyone could cheerfully carry on with the previous ambiguity, happily going on, until at long last the conditions were right, or the two of them parted ways. Too rash, Lowenjo told himself. Then he peeled Fedu's hand off of himself, turned, and said to him a word at a time. "My parents have always been fairly permissive towards me, especially after I became an adult. As long as my general direction was alright, they wouldn't come to interfere. As for who I hang out with, whether I had boyfriends or girlfriends, how I did my job, that was all my business. They wouldn't ask about it." Fedu faintly sensed what he was going to say and stared dumbly at him. "There is nothing to misunderstand." Lowenjo's hand tightened involuntarily, encircling Fedu's wrist hard enough to hurt a little. "They came over on purpose to see you today and behaved that way because I formally told them." Fedu was inexplicably somewhat panicked and tried subconsciously to interrupt him. "Shishong, that you're the person I'm planning to spend the rest of my lifetime with." I was not prepared for that. No. I'm so nervous. And we're taking the break now because we're at the end of the chapter. Okay, so yeah, that's where we're ending this first half of the live stream. Well, or third, depending how we go. But yeah, I'll be back in about 10 minutes time to continue with whatever the hell is about to happen. Okay, sorry about that. I was a little bit late coming back, but now we are. And time to resume the stress, the excitement. I just want to pull everything back up again. I hope the audio is still as okay as it can be. Okay, we are just jumping in immediately. Chapter 112, Verhovensky 22. Fladu's expression seemed to have been frozen by the 5 degrees below zero temperature outside. He was still for a long time, before Lawyer Gore had finished lapping up the bits of milk in the saucer and went over waving its tail to brush against his pant leg. He only then started as if waking from a dream. Lonjo's hand, clenched like an iron hoop, seemed to have some mechanism. It instantly loosened, letting him pull his wrist back. Fedu lowered his head and exchanged a look with the hefty Lawyer Gore. Then he laughed. Seriously? You scared me to death. The blood flowing like magma at Lonjo's heart cooled slightly, stopping its uncontrollable rushing, gradually falling to earth and becoming a thick pile of volcanic ash. He realized he'd chosen the wrong time. Ever since he'd brought Fedu here, he seemed to have been impatient, unable to control his emotions. The slow and steady tempo he'd initially planned out had turned into a runaway wild dog. He hadn't been able to resist touching him, hadn't been able to resist feelings that were like a what the heck is that? A breached dike? Why do they have so many words that I don't know at the moment? I'm assuming it's some kind of fish? Hadn't been able to resist saying superfluous words, and not just a few. Only a few days had passed, and his originally tentative plan had been unable to keep up with the changes. It had sprung 100 holes, becoming a rag that wouldn't fill a crack. And then his wretched parents had come to get their son into more trouble. The so-called skill and ease assigned to age and experience were likely only a false front. Much of the time, skill and ease were only the result of having seen it all before and being cold and fed up, unmoved. Unfortunately, having come this far, it was impossible to turn back, however much he wanted to. Lonjo felt he really had scared Fedu, so he softened his voice slightly. Is that all you want to say to me? Fedu considered, backed up a few steps, pulled out a chair in the dining room, and sat down, his elbows propped on the dining table, his fingers to his forehead, now and then pressing on his temples. Eyes half closed, he said, I thought you rather understood me. Oh, okay, cool. Fedu, I don't need to sound condescending, but I think he actually understands you better than you sometimes understand yourself. Because I get the sense that Fedu is retreating now because he's scared to advance and scared of this new potential feeling of belonging and care that he's just experienced from Lo and Joe's parents. I don't know, we'll see. Maybe I'm hoping for too much. Lo and Joe said, rather understood you in what respects? Of course, I don't mean that respect, Feyre joked. Seeing that Lorenzo wasn't about to applaud, he restrained his teasing smile, the weariness slowly coming up on his face. Feyre was silent for a while. I remember you warned me more than once to behave better, so I wouldn't one day experience the inside of your prison transports. If I recall correctly, on the day we hunted down Zhao Haocheng under the sky screen, I apologized for that. Luandro took out the warm milk and pushed it across the table. The cup stopped precisely in front of Feidu, not spilling a drop. Do you have any other grudges? Feidu temporarily closed his mouth, because there was a multitude of threads in his heart, flashing around dazzlingly. However glib-tongued he was, he still didn't know where to start. After a good while, he raised his head. No, in fact, there was no need for you to apologize. You weren't wrong. I didn't commit patricide because my abilities were limited. I couldn't manage it. When you were investigating Fei Chunye, the other group of people you found following him really were my people. I went through some not very legal channels to employ them. Later, when you retreated, all those people disappeared in one night. They worked shady jobs, so no one reported it to the police, leaving their whereabouts unknown. That was Fei Chunye warning me that my wings weren't strong enough. I couldn't shake him. That's the only reason I stopped, not because of any moral or legal restraint. Lowendral's heart began to sink. So what? Captain Law, you've been working as a frontline criminal policeman for so many years. You've seen 800, if not 1,000 psychopaths. You ought to trust your own first instincts. I really am that kind of person. The kind with a naturally flawed brain, a sense of morals and responsibility below ordinary levels, abnormal dopamine and pentaphyline? No, that's not. I'm gonna butcher that word if I try and pronounce it. Penethylamine, I think. Secretions, the kind that can't feel ordinary human emotions or build stable long-term relationships. And yet, there is Taran. There's also Lu and Joel, but there is Taran, who he has a very stable long-term relationship with. It's not romantic, but that's neither here nor there. Perhaps even incapable of feeling so-called love. Rowan Joel was leaning against the wall next to the dining table, the wall clock hanging over his head, constantly ticking forward. This thing had been broken for a long time. It had never been accurate. It was Feidu who had taken it apart and fixed it. Why does it feel like that's a metaphor for Rowan Joel? Like, oh, Lowendral's image of Feidu had never been accurate, and then the more Lowendral got to know Feidu, the more accurate his understanding of Feidu became. I'm probably reaching, aren't I? At this point, he said coldly, "If you aren't interested in me like that, if you don't care for me, then you can say it. You can say so clearly." Feidu opened his mouth for a moment, wanting to explain something, but he quickly forced himself to hold back. Lowendral's heavy spend a lifetime was pressing down on him so hard he could hardly catch his breath. "I thought you didn't care, sir." That's not the reaction of someone who doesn't care. His most instinctive reaction was to lose his head and flee. Only using all his strength could he maintain his refined bearing. He was like a vagabond trekking over thin ice through an endless night, having no idea which abyss or icy pool the so-called lifetime indicated. I mean, it could indicate solid ground, but the fact that Fedu isn't even considering that an option says a lot. Fedu was silent for a while, then at last only said, "I'm sorry." "Then why did you provoke me once and again, time after time?" Lawandro's voice was extremely quiet, as if his chest was piled full of rocks, and that voice had been forced out from the fissures between the rocks, each syllable creaking. "I warned you, refused you so many times. Why did you still—" Expression apathetic, Fedu avoided his line of sight. Lawandro stopped talking, suddenly feeling that this was pointless. He stood in silence where he was for a moment, heavily let out a breath, then strode towards the study and slammed the door. Luigo was startled by the world-shaking slam. It howled and bristled, straightening its neck and looking over, not knowing what the litter box attendant's problem was. Its fur bristled for a while. Seeing that no one paid attention to it, it ran over to Fedu in confusion, leaping lightly onto the dining table, exchanging a hopeless look with Fedu. I love how, Luigo is slowly coming to welcome Fedu into the household, sharing mutual exasperation and confusion. Fedu seemed to be entirely motionless. He looked back at it for a moment, the chaotic multitudes of threads in his heart quieting once more. His chest was hollow and empty, without thought or voice. After a good while, out of nowhere, he remembered what he'd said during the day in the severe interrogation room to Shashanan to get Shashanan to talk. "You may never again in your life meet another boy who cares for you so much." What Feng Bin had been for Shashanan was like what Luo Wenzhou was for him. A piece of accidental luck. Probably a person could only ask for one such outrageous accident in a lifetime. And later in the life he couldn't see the end of it, it would already be precious to have a memory, even if the memory was rather short. But that didn't matter. All the memories in the world were short. Oh, this hurts. Fedu slowly reached out a hand towards Luo Yuguo at first instinctively dodged away, then it hesitantly drew close, tentatively sniffing Fedu's hand hanging in midair, sniffing all around it in a circle. Then it finally lowered its defenses, put its head down, and rubbed it against the palm of his hand. Fedu's hand at last carefully came down, fitting snugly against Luigo's sleek back, stroking a few times from its head, following the direction of the fur. So this was what a cat was like. Fine fur, very soft, different from a stuffed toy. The roots of the fine hairs were warm. With your hand on it, you could feel the lingering breaths and the gentle, struggling heartbeats. A carefree little life. Luigo narrowed its eyes, making a gurgling in its throat, now and then waving its fluffy tail, letting out a very tender purr. "I'm missing my cat so much right now." Fedu coexisted with it almost tranquilly for a moment. Master Cat had been satisfied by this treatment, and thereupon curled itself into a ball. It slowly closed its narrowed eyes and went to sleep. Fedu suddenly drew back his hand, put away his phone, and went to the study door. He knocked 3 times. "Thank you for taking care of me the last few days." Lorenzo ignored him. Fedu didn't linger long. He turned away and got his coat and scarf down from the clothes rack in the entrance hall, preparing to go out and find a hotel nearby to make do with for one night. Tomorrow he'd think of getting someone to clean his long unoccupied little apartment and then move back in. Leaving a warm house to walk into a bone-chilling cold winter night truly did require a bit of courage. Fedu sighed, feeling that just thinking about it made his hands and feet turn cold reflexively. "I think it's more than just your extremities, sir." But when he just draped his coat and hadn't yet put his arms in the sleeves, the closed study door was suddenly thrown open heavily from inside. The unfortunate Loigo had just closed its eyes when it was startled awake again by a fierce wind sweeping over it. It didn't know who it had offended. It cried out indignantly and charged into Lorenzo's lately vacant second bedroom like a streak of smoke and wouldn't come out again. Before Fedu could turn his head, he was suddenly seized from behind. Caught unawares, he stumbled half a step. The coat loosely draped over him fell to the ground. Lorenzo grabbed his scarf. In order to not become a hanged ghost on Christmas Eve, he had to back up following the direction of the pull. Lorenzo pressed him against the wall of the narrow entrance hall. "I'll ask you 2 things," Lorenzo said heavily. "First, if you don't care for me, why did you have to get in front of me when the bomb went off on Jim Kaifeng's truck?" So I don't think we had this conversation. I don't think so. If I'm misremembering it, that's sad. And I'm an awful viewer then, but I don't think we had this conversation. But what we did have, which kind of gave the same message, and which is why I'm bringing it up and want to express my appreciation for it, is we had Peisu thinking about it while he was talking to Sha Nan, and saying how, this person was willing to give up his life for you and you abused that gift, basically. So very much the same kind of effect and impact was had, and I really appreciate that. Fedu said Lorenzo wasn't listening to him at all. Second, since you're a superficial psychopath who doesn't know love or hate, then why are there emetics and electric shock equipment in your basement? I've been a frontline criminal policeman for so many years. The number of psychopaths I've seen is 800 if it isn't 1,000, and I've never heard that any of them turned themselves in because he was hankering after torment. Fedu's pupils contracted fiercely. Then he instinctively struggled. I don't know that he ever knew Lorenzo knew about that before this. I think this is the reveal. Holding him down wasn't any more difficult than holding down a Shao Haiyang. Lorenzo twisted his hands behind his back, pulling the loose scarf of his neck and effectively wrapping it 3 times around his hands and tying it into a firm knot. Look, I'm not saying that Lorenzo has a tying people up kink. but the evidence might suggest it. He laughed coldly. President Fay, you didn't get enough exercise. Lowenjo dragged Fedu into the living room and nearly threw him onto the couch. His long legs hit the coffee table, and the bowl of tangerines prepared for Luo Cheng and Mu Xiaoqing rolled all over the floor. No one picked them up. Luonjo pulled open Fedu's shirt, which needed to be carefully handled at the dry cleaners. The torn buttons brushed his chin as they went flying. Luonjo pressed the hand to Fedu's chest. The body was young after all. Its ability to recover and its metabolism were both strong. Only faint traces remained of the years of old scars. Some hints of them could only be seen under a strong light. You used the tattoo to cover up the electric shock wounds. Weren't you afraid of burning your internal organs? Weren't you afraid of accidentally dying quietly in your empty basement? Oh, this also hurt in the show. Lowenjo looked down on him from on high. When we left Hung Ai Hospital that day, if I hadn't dragged you out, what were you planning to do? Fedu had hung around with a crowd of rich kids since he was young. His sense of shame was very limited. Sex and streaking were nothing remarkable, but it seemed that what Lowenjo had torn open wasn't only a shirt, but the sack of skin containing his flesh and bone. For the first time in his life, Fedu felt an indescribable panic. Trying to flee by any means possible, he pulled up his knees and hit him. Let go! Lowenjo didn't dodge. He bore it, the hard knees hitting him and making a painful sounding dull thump. Fedu froze, losing the opportunity to counterattack, letting Lowenjo hold down his knees and force them apart. Joints cracking, Fedu subconsciously closed his eyes. But while the two of them were locked for a long time in this posture that seemed so to forebode violence, Lowenjo didn't touch a hair on his head. I'd really love nothing better than to. After a good while, Lowenjo sighed, lowering his head, and gently kissed his dry lips, quietly saying, dig out your evil heart and rotten lungs and have a look. Sir? Fedu is smart, but for some reason when it comes to judgment on his character, he is not good at separating a jab from or a joke from an actual jab. And I don't think he's gonna read the sarcasm that you're currently spewing. Saying so, he relaxed his restraints, picked up a blanket from a rocking chair next to the couch, and dropped it over Fedu. He rubbed the center of his brow somewhat wearily. It's late. You should go wash up and sleep. I'll go back to my own room. That basement used to be Fei Chongyu's. Fedu didn't move a muscle. He suddenly spoke very quietly. Fei Chongyu was a sadist. If my mother violated any of his rules, he'd drag her down into the basement to punish her. Luonjo was at once seized with terror. His heart beat frantically, and he subconsciously held his breath. He secretly took 2 deep breaths and managed to keep his voice controlled, gently asking, what rules? Lots. I couldn't tell you clearly. For example, not being allowed to talk to outsiders, including the housekeeper and the cleaners. She wasn't allowed to make eye contact with others, not allowed to touch books and TV shows outside the ones he permitted. Her daily regimen wasn't fixed. Get out of bed at 7. Was fixed. Get out of bed at 7, sit down at the dining table at 8, start taking care of the vases in the house at 8:30, swapping in new floral arrangements. If she missed by more than 1 minute, he'd drag her into the basement. Electric shock is nothing, it's a very light method. Feidu quietly said Fei Chunye thought this was his way of showing love. You not only had to have a person's body, you also needed to have her mind. Pack her into a glass vase and make each one of her branches grow according to your wishes. Only then would she belong to you. He didn't avoid me when he did these things. There was even a child's desk in his basement. It's funny, but I was just, well, morbid actually, but I was just immediately reminded of in Fangs of Fortune, Yi Chen being like, there's two kinds of love, the one where you pick the flower for your own selfish purposes, and the one where you nurture it and actually like just support it to help it grow. And it feels quite similar, but obviously this one is much more toxic. Lo and Joe suddenly found it hard to breathe. Did he abuse me? Fede paused slightly, then, his expression unchanging, he said, No, I was there. Sorry? I knew it was coming because it was present in the show, but like the fact that he doesn't clock what his dad did as abuse towards him is just like, it's just insane, and at the same time it's so realistic. It's so strange how even regardless of how intelligent you are, because you all know Feidu's intelligence, it's so much harder to be objective about a situation and see the harm being done to you when you're actually in it. Fei Chunye even thought I represented parts of himself. He wouldn't have done anything to me. Wenjo relaxed slightly, letting out a breath. He walked over softly and sat next to Feidu. Ever since I was aware of things, I wanted to break free of him. But it was only wanting. I didn't do anything until her suicide. Feidu said quietly, she was trapped in a demon's cage with only me, aloof and unconcerned, beside her. After the long-term abuse, her psyche was abnormal. Apart from depression, she had a deep paranoia, thinking the air was full of probes watching her. Even when she was alone with me, she didn't dare to say anything that was against the rules. I mean, considering the man she married, can you blame her? Fei Chunye requested that she read to me for an hour before bed every night, and she spent 2 years mixing what she wanted to say into the reading topics, trying over and over to insulate me with the idea of freedom. My reaction must have been too indifferent. When she finished reading the last book, she finally demonstrated for me that if you couldn't be free, it was better to die. I'm sorry, Feidu murmured lightly. I actually knew from the start that she had killed herself. The reason that I persisted in disagreeing with the conclusion of suicide, not letting you off, forcing you to investigate again and again, was that I wanted to use you to make trouble for Fei Chunye. And then Luanzhou said, "Them? Do you know what a parasitic relationship is?" Feidu said, "I supply you with nutrients and carbohydrates, and you supply me with protection and micro-elements. There was a parasitic beast behind Fei Chunye." I mean, he's not wrong. That is an absolutely accurate but very grim description. Okay. Chapter 113, Verhovensky, 23. On the night that they were pursuing Zheng Kaifeng, Feidu had vaguely mentioned some power behind the Zhou clan to Luanzhou, and some secret and horrifying connection to the case of 3 generations of the Su family trafficking and murdering female children. The Zhou clan case, the death fleet, the kept wanted criminals. There was also the Zhou clan's young Bo. Young Bo had been valued by Zheng Kaifeng for no reason, clearly a good-for-nothing covered in fake gold leaf. But he'd been Zhou Junmo's personal secretary, and young Bo's father had also died in an unusual car crash, supposedly hitting and killing a team working on the project. And the greatest beneficiary had been an invisible shareholder called the Guangyao Fund. Why did I want to say foundation? Which just happened to be the owner of the usage rights to the patch of seaside land where Shu Wenchao had disposed of the little girls' bodies. Luanzhou had remembered this afterwards, and in fact he had made a simple investigation along those lines, but there had been too many things going on then, and the investigation had only been half-hearted. He hadn't gone in depth. And there was also Fei Chunye's unusual car crash, delicately coinciding with the old criminal policeman Yang Zhengfeng's time of death. Taran had once guessed that when it came to the enormous undercurrents and the countless links behind all this, Feidu must be the one who knew the most. I mean, he's not wrong. Now, like a 1,000-year-old clam spirit, he'd finally opened up a crack and revealed a corner of that dark world. It was already enough to make you tremble with fear. Fair enough. Luanzhou asked, "This parasitic beast you're talking about, is that the Guangyao Fund?" The company is only a shell, 1 leg of a centipede, 1 ring of a spider's web. It has no value. Rather, if you touch it rashly, it could easily warn the enemy in advance, and the people behind it could easily make a cunning escape. Ooh. I like the fact that they spoke about the idea of 1 ring of a spider's web, because I mean, we know how a spider's web works in terms of alerting the spider to motion on the web. So that's such a good description in terms of warning the enemy in advance. Feidu said quietly, "Keeping wanted criminals, assassinations, even building a colossal network of social connections, all of it requires a great sum of money. Fei Chunye made donations to them at fixed intervals and used his connections for them, supported them. And these people committed all manner of crimes to help him clear away obstructions. Luanzhou had contact with Fei Chengye in the early years when he'd been investigating Feidu's mother's suicide. His impression had been of a cold and refined man of elegant carriage. Regarding his wife's death, however, aside from the initial shock, his reminiscence and sadness had been insipid. It seemed rather unattached. But Luo Wenzhou remembered that the old criminal policeman who'd come in to assist had advised him that under these circumstances, Fei Chengye's sort of reaction was in fact the normal one, because a perpetually distraught woman would bring lengthy torment and suffering upon her family. When there was no blood ties or other yokes between a husband and wife, they were like two birds in a forest that would scatter each in their own direction when disaster hit. That is sad because it's at once kind of like makes it so you can't judge Fei Chengye's reaction, and now because his reaction wasn't genuine, it feels like you can't trust other people whose reactions are genuine's reaction. It's like, okay, how do you know when that reaction is genuine then? If someone is able to be so believable in how they present their grief. And it's also sad because grief is so often like so strange in its presentation that there is no correct way to grieve. But then at the same time, what do you look at in terms of trying to figure out if someone's grief is genuine? Like, how do you know? That Fei Chengye, with his vast properties, hadn't abandoned his wife and child, but had only stayed away from home, throwing himself into his business, was already rare good conduct. Hearing that his wife was dead, it was human nature to feel he'd been freed. If he'd instead displayed excessive grief, that would have been rather worthy of suspicion. Now it seemed that Fei Chengye's each and every move had been precisely planned. He had even pulled the wool over the eyes of an elder who'd been on the job over 20 years. The room was as warm as spring, but Luo Wenzhou's back was covered in a layer of cold sweat. How do you know these things? Fei Chengye didn't hide them from you either? Feidu struggled free of the scarf binding his hands. Oh, I forgot about that. And sat up rather wretchedly on the couch. He didn't pay any mind to his shirt, which Luo Wenzhou had pulled open. He casually smoothed his messy hair. His expression was so calm that his eyes were like two pieces of glass inlaid in his eye sockets, clear, icy cold, as if the turbulent emotions just now had all been an illusion, not leaving behind a single trace. Then he simply stood up, opened a cabinet door, and looked inside. Luo Wenzhou's breath was suspended because making Feidu speak was too difficult. Perhaps under his coercion he would reveal a few inklings, then come around and retreat once more. Whether he said anything, how much he said, would depend entirely on luck. Luo Wenzhou was afraid that if he breathed too loudly, he'd blow the luck away. Priest's description was also good. He was inwardly anxious, but he didn't dare to say anything to hurry him. Only lightly asked, "What are you looking for?" Feidu frowned. "Is there wine?" Of course there was wine. During the New Year and other holidays, no one could avoid making visits to family and friends and exchanging some gifts of bottles of red wine. But Luo Wenzhou, looking at Feidu's reeling figure, really didn't especially want to give him anything to drink. He fumbled around for a while, then pulled out a bottle of wine that was supposed to have the highest sugar content and lowest alcohol content. He poured a glass and gave it to him. The warm alcohol quickly flowed through Fedu's blood and spread to his limbs and bones, slightly dispersing the indescribable chill, while his brain, seemingly mired in ice-cold mud, cleared a little. Fedu held onto the empty glass, but didn't ask for a second one. He naturally knew when to stop. "I'm sorry, I've never told anyone these things. It's rather complicated." I couldn't get the main thread straight for a moment. Fedu paused, then followed his train of thought to a very remote beginning. "I had a maternal grandfather who I never met, the first person to go into the sea. He'd accumulated some family property. At first he was very opposed to my mother marrying Fei Chengyu, but he couldn't dissuade his daughter from her infatuation. After the wedding, he didn't have any contact with them." Wenjo didn't know why the main character of the story had changed, a family drama cutting into the plot of a criminal case, but he wasn't in a hurry to ask. He tried to put in a word following the subject, but the old man, who was keen-sighted and saw that there was something wrong with Fei Chengyu. I appreciate that we're not giving him the title of father. If Fei Chengyu had wanted, he could have disguised himself as any sort of person in the world. It wouldn't have been so easy for him to slip up. Fedu smiled, but his smile was fleeting. He said, "A sadist first has to use subtle means to break off his target's social connections. For example, her parents, relatives, friends render her alone and unsupported, while at the same time blackening her image to outsiders, so that even if she asked for help, no one would believe her. That's the first step." Yep. Very, very classic manipulation. And it's like, it feels so obvious when it's someone like Fedu's father, but it's so scary how common it is with people that seem completely normal. Very unnerving. That's the first step. Only then can you constantly force down her self-respect without scruple, wreck her dignity, firmly control your targets. Lowenjo faintly felt that this was wrong because he thought that while Fedu said this, he sounded like a true expert on criminal psychology, academic and impartial, as though what he was saying wasn't the subject of acute pain. It's easy to make ordinary friends misunderstand and stop contacting her by sowing discord a few times. The same principle applies to people a little closer. It only takes some more time. My mother's relatives were scattered during the old society's war years. There were few who still stayed in contact. She didn't have a host of distant relatives, so that made things easier. But apart from that, there are some connections that even if you break the bone, there will still be a ligament remaining. My grandfather was widowed young and only had one daughter. Angry as he was, he never changed his heir. I couldn't understand how Fei Chengyu had broken that connection and also obtained my grandfather's family legacy. Fei said. So I asked Fei Chengyu. And let me guess, he was proud enough of it that he told you. Relying on the formidable psychological qualities he had used for many years to scam people in the interrogation room, Lowenjo forced himself to maintain his expression. He bit his stiffened tongue, calming his voice with difficulty. You're saying that you went to question your father, to ask him about the particulars of how he abused and controlled your mom? This was too. Is it very hard to understand? Sadism often comes along with an inexplicable self-satisfaction, and Fei Chunye was especially narcissistic. He thought that these were all his abilities and works. He was happy to show them off to me, and took it as an opportunity to teach by example. I was literally about to say, like, he probably thought, oh, this is a teaching opportunity. Fedu said lightly, if I didn't understand anything, I only had to ask. If he didn't have questions when he finished listening, it would be taken to mean that he hadn't thought it over, that his attitude was incorrect. The young Fedu didn't especially want to know the outcome of the incorrect attitude. I mean, considering what he'd seen being done to his mom, I can understand being cautious regardless of personal experience. Like, even, how do I put it? Physical damage didn't need to be done to him for him to fear physical damage because of what he'd seen happen to his mom. Hope that makes sense. An indescribable anger leaped up in Lowenjo's heart. He would have loved nothing better than to drag Fei Chunye out of his cozy vegetative state, kick him into prison, and make him eat lead. That's all of us, yes. He took a deep breath. A good while later, he pressed down his undulating motions and asked in a grave voice, and then what? Fei Chunye told me that severing that kind of connection was very easy, because a dead person couldn't form a connection with anyone. My grandfather died in a car accident. He'd unexpectedly heard the news that my mother was pregnant and finally couldn't resist going to see her. Before this, my mom had been misled by Fei Chunye and thought that my grandfather had already broken off relations with her. When she received her father's olive branch, she was wild with joy. But on the day they had arranged to meet, a drunken driver hit my grandfather. Funny how that works. Arranging yourself a tidy assassination and, as a matter of course, inheriting the victim's property. The story sounded very familiar. Isn't it very much like a duplicate of the Zhou clan's wealthy family drama? Fedu displayed a none too clear smile. I asked Fei Chunye then, what if the traffic police had thought that this car crash had some points that merited consideration? For example, if they tracked the driver's whereabouts before his death and found something unusual, or there was some problem with his background. As soon as the police suspected this wasn't an accident but a deliberate murder, then, as the beneficiary of his legacy, Fei Chunye would be extremely suspect. Lowenjo truly didn't know whether he ought to praise him for being so meticulous about major crimes from such a young age. Fei Chunye casually told me, there are professionals to take care of these things. They won't slip up, Fedu said. That was the first time I heard about their existence from him. Fei Chunye said to me once that there was a precious sword in his hands, and in the future he could give it to me, provided I could hold it. Lowenjo's heart stopped, but at this point Fedu raised his head and met Lowenjo's suddenly anxious gaze. He smiled at once. No need to worry. That sword never came to me. In a somewhat hoarse voice, Luandril said, "You've known me and Taran for so many years and never revealed a word of this. Was it that you didn't trust us?" I mean, I understand Luandril's hurt over it, but considering the situation that he grew up in, trusting someone with Feidu's background would be akin to handing out a method to kill him. Like, that sounds a little bit overdramatic, but it would feel so dangerous and so like it wouldn't be worth the risk that I really can't blame Feidu. Feidu was silent for a while. He didn't answer directly, only said, "You know the old picture album project?" Luandril stared. "Do you still remember when I told you that I saw a paper written by Van Suyun, the head of the picture album project, in his basement? It wasn't only a paper. He had exhaustive materials about the picture album project, including about the people taking part and their relatives. You said your shifu was called Yang Zhengfeng, right? He had a daughter named Yang Xin, who was in elementary school then, in the city's 12th elementary school. On Mondays through Thursdays, she got taken to school and picked up by a classmate's parents who lived nearby. But on Friday evenings, she would wait on extra hours at school for her mother, right?" Luandril's blood ran cold. Even he hadn't known most of these details. How much power did this invisible net have? I mean, that is sickening. Just quickly want to check. Oh goodness, okay, we still have quite a few pages left. Okay, what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna finish just this chapter and then we'll end off a little bit past 2 hours, but not do a full 3 hours, because I just feel like us starting a new chapter after it would not work. I don't know. We'll see. Because also my camera's battery is about to die. Also, why had the picture album project been established back then? Had it really been merely to compile academic materials? Aside from the experts at Yan Security Uni, wouldn't it have been enough to send a student to make contact and find someone in charge of records to cooperate? Why had so many frontline police officers taken part? And why had the level of confidentiality been so high? And while the level of confidentiality had been that high, there had still been a leak. That could only mean as for what this sword really is, who it is, where it is, how great its power is, I don't know any of that. When Fei Chunye became incompetent after the car crash, I spent a few years thoroughly taking over his business, digging up some traces. I found that the associated donations and use of social connections had stopped years ago. If I hadn't dug deep into the property management records, I wouldn't have been able to discover that there had even been such a secret connection between Fei Chunye and them. Then I started to suspect that his car crash hadn't been so simple. True. If Fei Chunye had only gotten into an accident, then these people linked to him by ties of blood couldn't have refrained even from showing their faces. Moreover, they couldn't have refrained from interfering at all with the company's transfer of rights, disappearing so silently. Feidu was evidently Fei Chengye's only heir. Whether he fit the criteria of an heir or not, these people should have contacted him. They wouldn't have abandoned a former financial backer like this. Luanzhou said they'd broken it off. Feidu spat out a breath. Right, they'd broken it off, and Fei Chengye suffered from the backlash of the demon sword that he'd kept. Luanzhou no longer had any attention to spare for his rejected confession, and no time to go into raptures about Feidu's rare openness. I'm only just realizing that we completely sidelined the confession. Oh my word, how did that happen? He pulled over a chair and sat down and, frowning, pondered for a long time, trying to smooth out his thoughts. Why? Feidu said, I remember I gave you an analysis of where Shu Wen Chao would have disposed of the bodies. Luanzhou nodded. Private property that no one would ever dig up, or a particular region where even if someone did find a body, they wouldn't report it to the police. The Binhai district didn't satisfy either requirement. It was far outside of expectations, but the bodies really had been buried there, and they really hadn't been discovered for many years. It could only be summed up as a lucky break. After all, China was so large, there were countless wild places no one went to for decades. This kind of luck wasn't all that unusual. When Fei Chengye was in charge, the Guangyao Fund once gave him a plan for a collaborative development of a Binhai project. The board of directors refused on the grounds of an unclear profit model. Oh, by the board of directors, I mean Fei Chengye himself. Luanzhou, ... He was feeling that tonight his own ears weren't good enough. In other words, Shu Wen Chao disposed of the bodies there not because he thought the scenery was beautiful, Luanzhou said, but because he knew that it was a safe graveyard. He was in contact with those people. Perhaps even paid rent to use that graveyard. That's a horrible thought. Given that Shu Wen Chao was the kind of person who would use a box of ashes as a hiding place, he'd be capable of that. If that place had been bought for that purpose, then wasn't it an even bigger storage locker for ashes and bodies? Great. Sorry. Fei Chengye said, it was the Su family case that gave me a guess about what had happened to Fei Chengye. Luanzhou was attempting to look at this thing from the point of view of an ordinary person. In other words, your dad didn't like this pedophilia business, refused to provide funds to participate, and so parted company with those people? That's a very kind way of looking at it, Luanzhou. I don't think that's the case. Feidu laughed silently. How could that be? That would be too honorable. Ouch. Okay. I'm a little bit torn right now. I kind of want to keep going. Okay, I think I'm gonna take a 10-minute break and then I'll be back for another 40 minutes-ish of reading before we finish off for the night. Okay, we're back, and I hope the audio is still audible. Not great, but audible. Okay, we are just gonna continue until either the end of the hour or the end of a chapter. Hopefully, both coincide neatly, but we'll see. Let me just pull up the chat again. A little low again. That is just so weird. I have not changed anything. Honestly, I don't know. I can try pull this a little bit closer, but that's about as close as it can get. Okay. Let's hope this works. Anyway, I'm just gonna start immediately because we only have half an hour left. Chapter 114, Verhovensky 24. Lowenjo looked at him in amazement. Given my understanding of Feuchinier, I think his reason was very clear. A problem of profits. Feidu held down the glass with one finger and spun it on the table. The real estate market was rising then. Land prices were going up. How many novelty-seeking psychopaths would have needed to pay how much rent to cover the costs and future losses? Of course, those were far from the only funds Feuchinier had paid out under the guise of donations. How could he very well have put that piece of land down to a donation? But the project itself made him uneasy. At this point, Lowenjo had already adjusted his train of thought. Feuchinier had been a sadist, extremely controlling and extremely narcissistic. As his ambitions and his wealth increased apace, he must have been constantly puffing himself up. He absolutely wouldn't have allowed anything in his hands to get out of control. I mean, luckily it was his self-belief that kind of ended up shooting him in the foot, where Feidu finding out information is concerned, at least. Given his acuteness, he definitely would have realized that those people's conduct of staking a claim and establishing a graveyard was an omen that they were no longer satisfied with being killers and hired thugs. They were constructing an even more colossal, even more dreadful sounding industrial chain. Wanting to use the rental graveyard to draw in a large net, bring in all the blood-drinking and flesh-eating monsters from the shadows, get dirt on them, and thus build their own kingdom and order. At the start, Feuchinier thought that he was rearing this parasitic beast. He didn't expect that when he brought it up, it would want to establish its own business and downgrade President Fei to an ordinary collaborator. Lowenjo slowly said, "That's what you mean." But while Feuchinier refused to give them the money, they still got that piece of land. This time, without waiting for Feidu to speak, Lowenjo answered himself in accordance with logic. Because they had more than one backer, the Zhou clan, Zhou Junmao and Zheng Kaifeng were among them, right? Do you remember Zhou Huijin's statement to the interrogation room? What? Zhou Huijin said that 21 years ago he overheard Zhou Junmao and Zheng Kaifeng's dialogue in the Zhou residence. The Zhou clan's advance into the domestic market was blocked at the time. The two of them were having a secret discussion about an assassination pretending to be a car accident. If Zhou Huijin didn't lie, then it shows that those people had more than one financial backer from the start, were controlled by more than one power. Feuchinier's problem of making too much of himself may not have changed even in death. Feidu gave a derisive laugh, his smile like a small cut in a thin paper, pale and incisive. Ooh, that's a nice description. Though these are all my guesses, they may not be correct, but there's something you ought to have noticed. Luanzhou looked up. You mean Feng Bin's murder, an assassination, a mysteriously vanished wanted criminal as the killer. That really is the same method as in their elimination of Dong Xiaoqing and Zheng Kaifeng. Not only that, today that little girl told me that the person who installed the tracking software on her phone is called Wei Wenquan. When you were all busy with interrogations this afternoon, I did a little investigating. This Wei Wenquan is in the same class as Feng Bin, the class monitor. He can rally a multitude with a single cry at Yufeng. It's likely he's the head of the bullying clique. Also, none of that is important. What's important is that his father is Wei Zhanghong. I mean, that means nothing to me right now, but I'm sure it's gonna mean something to us soon. I know, we called and summoned him. I heard Erlang say that he seemed to be a very famous developer. Lord Zhou gave Feidu a doubtful look. A land developer, by any chance? But I think he doesn't have any negative press apart from being especially rich. Wei Jianhong is low key, doesn't lightly show his face in public, and doesn't talk much. But I've heard a story about this person, Feidu said quietly. A few years ago, he's supposed to have gotten a piece of land in a development zone in D City. Of course, he was very thick with the local government when he got the land. The city government said that the plan for the development zone was already complete, and the future of the piece of land would be the only land used for residential purposes in the whole commercial district, which businesses, with businesses all around. They wouldn't have any competitors. But this was an unwritten agreement to transfer land, with only a verbal promise. You understand, right? A verbal promise was the same as no promise at all. Later, maybe because of road repairs or for some other reason, the progress of the project was delayed a little. By the time their project was finally completed and they could start to sell in the same commercial district in a better location, a large swath of residents had already been built, and they'd had about half a year to snatch away sales. Many buyers had moved in. The city isn't one of the frontline cities. There isn't a large transient population. The local market is only so large. Two residential areas in some similar locations that were about the same in every respect were life and death competitors. The side that got permission to sell first would squeeze the other out of existence. Lo and Joel wasn't an expert on the business aspect of things, but Feidu was giving a careful explanation. He roughly understood and nodded. So this fell through for Wei Jianhong, and then what? Then something happened at the competitor's estate. A murderer who'd been wanted for 2 years somehow scurried over to D City and stabbed 6 people in a row in the garden at the center of the estate. When the police came, he resisted arrest and grabbed a student right in front of them and was attempting murder when he was shot dead. The story goes that the blood dyed the lotus pond in the garden red. The whole estate became an unlucky abode because of this. Many owners sold off their property at low prices, but Wei Jianhong's project came back from the dead. All the houses were sold within a few years. Lo and Jaw. ... It turned out that when humans had broken through the moral bottom line, they could also sometimes demonstrate stupefying ingenuity. Oh no, that is the best backhanded compliment I've ever heard. Though I didn't verify it, it's all gossip. Because this Mr. Way became well known through this pure coincidence, many people say he's a lucky star. Fedu shook his head. I can't say for sure whether he's lucky, but his darling son is definitely connected to Feng Bin's murder. His darling son is definitely not so darling. Lo and Joe rubbed his forehead. The two of them fell silent at the same time, each digesting numerous and jumbled pieces of information in the same hours of the morning. Because the two of them weren't at all sleepy and very wide awake now, they couldn't help digesting the sequence of cause and effect. It wasn't long before the high-speed movement of their brains slowly decelerated, while the surging blood rushed to the heart. The emotions and desires knocked out by the huge secret appeared like the truth coming to light. Fedu's lips had taken on a trace of color from the glass of red wine. It looked almost bright and fresh on his pale face. He looked in faint longing at the bottle of wine, feeling his hands and feet grow cold again, and wanted to have another glass. But Luandro blocked his hand midway. Are you finished confessing? Luandro asked. Fedu's throat moved. Luandro cleared his. Then, shouldn't it be my turn? Oh, I'm excited. Scared, but excited. Fedu was clearly leaning on one side of the table with his shirt in a state of disrepair. Hearing this, his fingers, hanging curled at his sides, tightened, and his excessively focused gaze fell on Lowenjaw. He was clearly expressionless, hardly moving a muscle, but his whole body language changed subtly, giving the impression that he had sat upright and straightened his clothes. I feel weirdly called out because I think that's very similar to how I perked up at Lowendraw's words. Oh no. Lowendraw had only said one word when Fedu interrupted him. Captain Law, wait a minute. Don't you wonder why Logosheng would let Shashanan go? Wasn't it the same as telling the police that there was a problem with the girl, making you question her? Lowendraw sighed and somewhat helplessly said, Yes, I do wonder. Fedu said, And in the case of kidnapping and selling girls, who was it that told Su Luo Zhang the details of the old case? Why would she suddenly copy Su Shaolan's methods? And Luo suddenly interrupted him. And I also wonder how, when there was a problem at the Flower Market District Sub-Bureau, that report somehow managed to break through Wang Hongliang's observation and came to the City Bureau. I wonder if that mysterious text sent I wonder if that mysterious text message Zhao Haocheng brought up really was sent by someone else, or whether it was all his own performance. I wonder who had such a hard time holding their tongue that they had to notify Dong Xiaoqing of the truth about her father's death and make her commit an irreparable blunder. And I wonder very much which work-obsessed god we've offended this year to get knocked dizzy by a string of major cases so we don't even have time to take our annual leave. I haven't obviously haven't read Feidu's response to this, but I love how Lowenjo is so desperately. He's like, I acknowledge all of the things that you're making me question. I acknowledge them. I'm aware of them. Can we not focus on them right now? I'm trying to seduce you. Oh my word. There is a very good explanation, Feidu, staring into his eyes, asked. Do you want to hear it? Lowenjo paused, then expressionlessly said, not really. Sorry, I'm not managing the expressionlessly very well. But Feidu seemed to not have heard. He kept talking. Someone's been pushing these cases in front of your eyes, leading you to investigate them, so that those people would be panicked and nearly reveal themselves over and over, forcing them to break off a body part each time, throwing out their backers with immediate motives as shields. The number of backers can't be that high because there aren't so many true psychopaths, and those with the financial resources to support them are as rare as unicorn horns and phoenix feathers. When those people had cut themselves down to a pitiful bare stalk out of self-preservation, they'd have to find another investor. For example, Lowenjo coldly said, Feidu, shut up. For example, me. Feidu turned a deaf ear on him. For example, Fei Chengye's heir. Me. I fit all the criteria. I should have been one of them before. It was only sheer chance, the fact that Fei Chengye broke it off with them, that meant I didn't receive that sword. I thought of killing Fei Chengye over and over. I definitely wouldn't care about any enmity for the killing of your father, and I succeeded in working my way into the city bureau using my position to investigate the truth about the old picture album project. Deceiving. Lowenjo hit the table, but he couldn't interrupt Feidu's speech. In fact, they've already made veiled attempts to contact me. I've ignored them because I didn't want to seem to know too much of the inside story. But if Wei Jiang Hong gets in trouble this time too, then they'll likely be under attack from all quarters, urgently needing new funds. They'll have to kneel and beg me for alms. I'll have a chance to snap their wings, turn the parasitic beast into my personal watchdog. That's what Fei Chengye wanted to do, but couldn't accomplish. This time Lowenjo was thoroughly frightened. He immediately stood up. They've contacted you? When did this happen? Why didn't you say anything? Feidu's level brows rose gently. Maybe I wasn't ready to give myself up yet. It's so sad that Feidu still thinks that that is how Lowenjo views him, because it's, to me, it very much seems like, and I think this is the truth of it, is Lowenjo being worried because it's like a criminal empire is trying to get in touch with you, and that might put you in danger. I want to protect you. And Feidu is reading it as, oh, he thinks I'm seriously interested in this. The curse came to Lowenjo's lips, and he forced it back. He lowered his head and looked at Feidu, leaning against the table, and suddenly realizing that if today's unexpected incident hadn't occurred, Feidu may have concealed this forever. If those people had come to see him, he would have gone along with it, gone into the abyss without help or connection. The fact that this was at one point called Abyss, Light and Darkness, as like the show title, says a lot. Fedu pretended to be an idle son of the wealthy, pretended to lead a life of luxury and dissipation, pretended to have a powerful desire for control. He'd snipped at the Zhou clan first thing after Zhou Junmao's death, heartlessly wallowing in the feast of money. He also wore a beast in human clothing disguise. The beast in human clothing naturally had to be a gentleman, had to be urban, had to be extremely patient, elegant, and graceful. He'd made himself seem callous and powerful, up to anything. But in the end, a beast in human clothing was only a beast. However much skill there was, it was still only on the surface. Any sudden change would require deliberation. Which beast would be as unassailable as he was, able to carry the human disguise to the point of keeping company with the babbling village woman Wang Jun and the ignorant little girl Chechen. Lo and Zhou remembered the night of Zhou Junmao's car crash. He thought that rather than making enormous profit short selling Zhou clan stock, Fedu in fact would have liked to go home and sleep. He was clearly a person who could be perfectly satisfied with a bowl of lean pork congee and a plate of salted vegetables on a winter's night. Give him a cup of coffee and some trivial documents to arrange, and he could tranquilly while away a whole day in the corner of the office. Where was his desire to go into the abyss and contend with fierce beasts for the power and money? Lo and Zhou had suddenly turned silent. Faint unease instantly rose in Feidu's heart. Because this crowd exists all these years, you felt that you couldn't escape Fei Chungyue, right? Lo and Zhou spoke very calmly. So you'd rather throw yourself in, become one of them, control them, tear them up by the roots. If you failed, you might die without an intact corpse like Zheng Kaifeng. If you succeeded, it wasn't as though you were a planted agent. When the time came, you would go to prison along with them. Have you thought about that? The sad thing is, I don't like before all this, before they started getting this close, I don't think Feidu thought anyone would genuinely care. I think he felt that it would confirm Lo and Zhou's views on him, and it might disappoint Taoran, and that's about it. And suddenly now, his not his image, but the way that Tao Zi and Lo and Zhou view him matter. It truly matters to him in a way that he wasn't anticipating or ready for. Feidu forced a smile. You aren't stupid. Of course you thought it through clearly, Lo and Zhou said. But whether you died or spent the rest of your life in prison, you thought that would be pretty good, right? At least you'd be free, unencumbered. There'd be nothing to worry about. Because if you couldn't be free, it was better to die. Thanks for that. That didn't hurt at all. Lowendraw propped his hand on the edge of the table behind him. Why are you willing to reveal everything to me now, letting your plans fall through on the verge of success? Is your conscience prickling you? Fedu involuntarily backed up. Bah, you don't have any such thing as a conscience, Lowendraw said. You looked at me and thought, how such a handsome man is confessing his love to me, crying and wailing about wanting to be with me. What am I doing still thinking of dying or going to prison? Besides, you have to get a regulation haircut if you go to prison. Do you know? Lowendraw's a different breed of man, okay? Fedu was speechless. Since you were even willing to lay out your evil heart and rotten lungs for me, it means you were asking me to pull you out. I pulled, and you dodged, and struggled again. Lowendraw hit Fedu's forehead with his palm. What's your problem? Are you testing my strength? Fedu seemed like Loigo leaping onto the dining table and being knocked off with a chopstick. Somewhat dazed, he let Lowendraw smack him. Oh, I'm just picturing Peisu in this moment because like the actor who played Peisu did such a good job of that like totally caught off guard, indignant look. You always used to make me mad. Whenever I was in a bad mood, then you were always the person I imagined. Imagine taking a burlap sack and taking you to a little alley for a beating. But there was a time later when the whole crowd of us went to play around at Tauran's house and accidentally knocked a crack into a brick in the wall. The adaptation was so accurate, my word. Okay. Taran was renting and the landlord was a problem. If he saw it, he'd definitely make a fuss. Only Tarana didn't say anything at the time, and we didn't take notice, not expecting that you, a half-grown child, would run around the building materials market, find a brick that was exactly the same, get a set of tools from who knows where, and spend half a day taking out the old brick and swapping in the new. I went to have a look afterwards and the job was pretty well done. I thought then that while you were perennially, I think, while you perennially needed a spanking, you could also sometimes be pretty lovable. And if you ever went wrong, it would be regrettable. I can't believe that was a direct quote. I can't believe they got that direct quote into the show. Oh, okay, sorry. Lowendraw's voice was getting quieter and quieter. In the end, it was almost a whisper. So I was always very severe toward you. There was no one else I got so exasperated being around. But that day at the city bureau, you'd obviously come with a crowd of drinking buddies to make trouble, but in the end you stayed to accompany her Jongyi's mother. And I suddenly thought that, actually, even if I wasn't minding you, wasn't criticizing you every day, you still wouldn't go wrong. I never thought that if I gave our interactions a drop of color, you'd run away and set up a dying bat with it. Start pestering me all day with no thought for the consequences. Never mind fooling me into giving you my body. You even dared to fool me into giving you my feelings. I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now. but it's in a good way at least. You asshole. Lorenzo repeatedly jabbed Fedu's chest with one finger. You actually do care for me. You didn't have any other ideas before, and now you want to stay with me. Do you dare to admit it? Fedu froze under his attentive gaze for 3 seconds. Then he snatched his jabbing paw and instantly pressed Lorenzo against the little dining table, stopping his mouth with biting force. I am happily speechless right now. Oh, that was so good. I have to say, I was very excited to read this part of the story. For some reason, I hadn't quite clicked that we were so close to it, so I wasn't prepared for it to happen now, but it did not disappoint at all. I'm so happy. Okay, so that is the end of today's live stream. I'm very happy that I actually decided to just push through and do another hour, because it was definitely worth it in my opinion. And yeah, if all goes well, I will see you guys again on Saturday, and tomorrow I have a new episode 1 of a currently airing Netflix show, if I'm not mistaken. So if anyone is interested in that, it's gonna go up the normal time if all goes well and copyright is with me. So yeah, I'm very excited for that. Quite a bit of a different vibe. It's hockey related, if that gives you any ideas. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me for this, and otherwise hopefully I'll see you on Saturday. Zaijian.